A true imposter is pretending to be something that they are not, without putting in any sort of effort or having any intention to actually be what they are pretending to be. But most often, with this term, imposter syndrome, it's used to describe someone who is learning, trying, doing, creating. And they just have a fear that they aren't living up to expectations regardless of their skills or capabilities or achievements, but they are doing the work. Welcome to Ebbs and Flows with Erin. In this show, we're getting real about navigating the ups and downs of life together. I'm your host, Erin, and we're ditching the pressure to have it all figured out along the way because honestly, nobody does. We'll explore all things healing, growing, creating, and connecting. And if you deal with anxiety, depression, being a highly sensitive person, or just feeling overwhelmed by life sometimes, I see you, and this show is for you. My intention with these conversations is simple: to leave you feeling empowered, validated, and most importantly, reminded that you are never alone, no matter where you're at on your own journey. Learning that we all have the power to heal genuinely changed my life. And the best part, healing does not have to be complicated. The smallest changes really can make the biggest impact, and it can be joyful, fulfilling, and something that we do together. So join me in getting real about what it means to heal. Thank you for being here, and now let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to Ebbs and Flows with Erin, or welcome back to Ebbs and Flows with Erin. I'm your host, Erin, and whether you are listening or watching over on YouTube today, I am, as always, very grateful to have you here with me. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about imposter syndrome. And most importantly, why imposter syndrome is not real. So this is something that I struggled with for a long time, and I still experience the feelings that come with imposter syndrome. But learning about what exactly it is and the root of it has allowed me to struggle with it less. And in turn, it allows you to create, heal, grow, and experience a more positive relationship with yourself, a more positive self-concept. So we are going to dive into some psychology behind imposter syndrome, definitions, explanations, some research, and then more importantly, why I believe it is not real, and how you can push through imposter syndrome and overcome it to experience growth, healing, and a more positive relationship with yourself, most importantly. So I did some research, thank you internet, for some concrete definitions and research behind imposter syndrome before I go into why I believe it is not real. So the definition from Psychology Today of imposter syndrome is: people who struggle with imposter syndrome believe that they are undeserving of their achievements and the high esteem in which they are, in fact, generally held. They feel that they aren't as competent or intelligent as others might think, and that soon enough, people will discover the truth about them. Those with imposter syndrome, which is not an official diagnosis, are often well accomplished. Instead of acknowledging their capabilities as well as their efforts, they often attribute their accomplishments to external or transient causes, such as luck, good timing, or effort that they cannot regularly expend. Whether in the areas of academic achievement, career success, or personal relationships, a person can struggle with pressure and personal expectations. So that is from Psychology Today. And some examples of things that you might think about yourself that can point in the direction of feeling like an imposter are: if I were really intelligent, capable, and competent, I should know everything in my field, I should get it right the first time, I should excel in everything I do, I'd always know the answer, I'd always understand what I'm reading, I would always feel confident, I would never make a mistake, I would never be confused, I would never need help, I would be more efficient at this would come easier to me, blah, 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 blah. So these are all examples, and if you've ever felt this way, then you may have at one point identified as having imposter syndrome. Like the definition said, it can come up especially in career-related situations or personal achievements, but even relationships or creative endeavors. There are many ways that imposter syndrome can show up. And research shows that around 70% of adults may experience imposter syndrome at some point in their life, which honestly, I was kind of shocked at this number. I kind of thought it would be higher, but I guess that's not a bad thing. And to clarify, a person Everyone can have normal jitters or feelings of anxiety or nerves before doing something or when they're starting to do something new. And that's very normal. Where we're talking about imposter syndrome that people identify with is when it's more extreme, where no matter how loud the applause or how big the praise is, how big the achievement is, you find a way to explain them away and still not feel like you belong or like you are worthy or deserving of the praise you're receiving or the room that you're sitting in. You can make up excuses for yourself like, oh, I got lucky this time, making excuses for the success that you are having. And this is something that overshadows and gets in the way of you acknowledging your competence, your achievements, and that you are worthy and deserving of the things that you are doing. And as we said, to clarify, imposter syndrome is not an official psychological diagnosis, but people who experience imposter syndrome are likely to experience other mental health struggles like anxiety, depression, but you cannot be diagnosed with imposter syndrome. So far, you might be thinking, well, you said you're going to talk about why imposter syndrome isn't real, but you're giving us all of these definitions and research about imposter syndrome. And we are going to dive into the root of imposter syndrome now, which will help me explain why imposter syndrome is a myth and it's not actually real. And even just having awareness of that can help you to fight the feelings of imposter syndrome and set yourself free instead of allowing yourself to be held back by feelings of not being good enough, no matter what you do or achieve. And this is important in my experience for personal growth and healing, and in general, how you feel about yourself as a human being. And life feels much lighter and more joyful when you can look at your accomplishments or look at the things that you are doing, trying, learning, creating, and feel proud of them without feeling like you have to be an expert or be perfect at everything you do, which just creates a cycle of shame and resentment towards yourself and feeling stuck in life. So let's get into it. Okay, so there are 5 competence types, which I learned in my research, which can also be known as 5 different types of imposter syndrome. So we're going to go over what the 5 competence types are based on research. I'm reading this from impostersyndrome.com. So this seems like a trustworthy source to be reading this from. And before today, I did not realize there is more than one type of imposter syndrome or competence type. But once I go over these 5, I will then share my argument for the fact that they all kind of fall under one category, which will then lead me into why I don't think imposter syndrome is real. So let's go over them. The first competence type or imposter syndrome type is the perfectionist. And the perfectionist's primary focus is on how something is done. This includes how work is conducted and how it turns out. One minor flaw in an otherwise stellar performance, or 99 out of 100, equals failure and thus shame. And we have our Truth About Perfectionism podcast episode. I believe it's episode 5 or 6 of this podcast. And it dives into why shame is the root of perfectionism and how perfectionism holds you back and keeps you stuck, and why self-compassion is the answer to breaking out of the perfectionism loop. This explanation mentioned shame, and that episode we dive into why shame is the root of perfectionism. So if you're interested in that, you can give that a listen, and I will be talking more about perfectionism on this podcast because being a recovering perfectionist is an ongoing journey in life, but it's something that is really important to talk about because especially if you're also someone who experiences anxiety, depression, overwhelm, burnout, understanding what perfectionism really is can immediately start to help set you free from being stuck in the shackles of it. Okay, the second competence type is the expert, which is the knowledge version of the perfectionist. Here, the primary concern is on what and how much you know or can do. Because you expect to know everything, even a minor lack of knowledge denotes failure and shame. Number 3 is the soloist, who cares mostly about who completes the task. To make it on the achievement list, it has to be you and you alone. Because you think you need to do and figure everything out on your own, needing help is a sign of failure that evokes shame. Number 4 is the natural genius, who also cares about how and when accomplishments happen. But for you, competence is measured in terms of ease and speed. The fact that you have to struggle to master a subject or skill, or that you're not able to bang out your masterpiece on the first try, equals failure, which evokes shame. We can quickly see how shame is the root of all of this. And finally, the superhuman measures competence based on how many roles they can both juggle and excel in. Falling short in any role, as a manager, team member, parent, partner, friend, volunteer, etc., all evokes shame because they feel they should be able to handle it all perfectly and easily. Okay, so as I read through all 5 of those definitions, although they are categorically different views of what competent is for oneself, I would argue that they all fall under the category of being a perfectionist. I know in my experience as a recovering perfectionist, I can identify with all 5 of those categories, and I think that's the experience for a lot of people who identify as perfectionists, because shame is the root of it. Shame is the root of it all. Whether you feel like you don't know enough, or that you have to be the one who does everything and it has to be perfect, or that you have to be perfect at every single thing that you do, no matter which one of these categories, it's all rooted in shame and feeling like a failure, and being anything less than perfect makes you feel like you have a lower worth as a human being, which just simply is not the case. And when we know that shame is the root of perfectionism and that there's no such thing as being perfect, we can begin to break free from the perfectionism loop. So in further research about imposter syndrome, I found from Claire Josa. Claire is considered a global authority in the fields of imposter syndrome, burnout, and toxic resilience. I found from her research the 4 P's of imposter syndrome, which are perfectionism, procrastination, paralysis, and people-pleasing, which again, all of these P's fall into perfectionism. And this fits right into the fight, flight, or freeze state of your nervous system. So with imposter syndrome, the feelings that come with imposter syndrome and the action that comes with it, or lack thereof, means that your nervous system is in the driver's seat and you are going into fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, flight, and freeze all fall under perfectionism and fawning. And fawning is a trauma response where a person behaves in a people-pleasing way to avoid conflict and establish a sense of safety. And procrastination is part of perfectionism. And in this state, typically your nervous system is going into flight, where you feel like you are too busy to head towards your goals or take any true action towards doing, creating, learning, or trying things, which procrastination is really just a defense mechanism to keep yourself safe, or what your nervous system, your subconscious mind, view as safe, because it doesn't allow you to try anything new or to grow or change. And then paralysis is the freeze state, where you're so overwhelmed by the fear of change or growth or doing something new and not being good enough at it that you just don't do anything at all. And then people pleasing is the fawning state. Like I said, it's a trauma response. You innately take action aligned with masking yourself, first of all, your true self, and then doing whatever you have to do in whatever environment to ensure that the people around you are comfortable and stable and happy, because if they're comfortable, stable, and happy, you feel safe and you don't have to deal with the discomfort of letting people down or disappointing people. So those are the 4 P's of imposter syndrome: perfectionism, people-pleasing, paralysis, and procrastination, which again, all of this falls directly under perfectionism. The analysis paralysis of perfectionism that keeps you stuck and holds you back. You're constantly taking in more information and just thinking about the things that you want to be doing, or thinking about how you can do it better, and then procrastinating doing anything. And then once you do it, you've put in so much work, you've had to go into high gear to get something done, and then you accomplish it, you're getting praise for it, or you've gotten good results, you've achieved success in it, but you still don't feel like you deserve it or you're worthy of it or you feel like you are an imposter because you know how much it took for you to get to that point. So again, this all stems from your relationship with yourself and your self-worth. It has nothing to do with the facts of how worthy, deserving, skilled, capable, accomplished you actually are. It's all stemming in large part from your childhood, from conditioning that typically happens from the ages of 0 to 7 that conditions how you feel about yourself or how deserving you feel or how safe you feel to be praised or to achieve things. And oftentimes people who identify as having imposter syndrome can be some of the most successful people with some of the biggest accomplishments, and they never feel like they belong or like they're worthy or deserving of it, always feeling like they're going to be quote unquote found out. And this brings me right into why imposter syndrome is not real. After I've given you all of this information about imposter syndrome, I'm going to tell you that it is not real. A true imposter is pretending to be something that they are not, without putting in any sort of effort or having any intention to actually be what they are pretending to be. But most often, with this term, imposter syndrome, it's used to describe someone who is learning, trying, doing, creating. And they just have a fear that they aren't living up to expectations regardless of their skills or capabilities or achievements, but they are doing the work. They are trying. They are doing, they are creating, they are learning. So imposter syndrome is not real because a true imposter is pretending. People with imposter syndrome are doing. Does that make sense? Because when I reframed this in my mind, it really, truly did help me to push through the imposter syndrome while doing anything, especially when you're at the beginning of doing something new or trying something new. Understanding that you're never going to get to the point of being an expert or get to the status of whatever the expectation you set out for yourself is. You can never reach the status of the expert that you want to be if you aren't trying. You are always going to feel like an imposter when you are trying something new, especially in the world of comparison with social media and whatnot. It is so easy to compare your progress or where you are at with others. But you have to keep in mind that you can't compare your day 1 or your day 30 to someone else's day 602. And is anyone ever really an expert at everything they do? Most often you're doing more than one thing in your life, and the more that you're doing, the harder it is to be an expert at it all. And it's okay to not be an expert or be perfect at everything you do. Or anything you do. But you can't even allow yourself to get close to that point of being an expert or feeling good enough if you don't allow yourself to keep going through the stages of feeling like an imposter. So this leads us to, how can you fight imposter syndrome? Number 1, expect mistakes and failures, especially in the beginning stages of doing or trying anything new. Expect that you're going to make mistakes and you're going to fail, because they're inevitable. And if you aren't making mistakes, you aren't failing, you aren't progressing, you're not growing, and you're never going to reach the point of being an expert or whatever that point that in your mind you want to reach. You're never going to get there if you don't just start trying. And think of any super successful business or person. They've all told stories of their failures and their mistakes. We can hear these stories from these successful people, maybe in positions we wish to be in. And I feel like it's still hard to accept them, especially if you're someone who identifies as a perfectionist, struggles with imposter syndrome. It can be hard to really take in that advice and decide, okay, I'm going to put myself out there, I'm going to try, I'm going to do, I'm going to create, and there's going to be failures and there's going to be mistakes, and that's okay. It means I'm growing. It's so much easier said than done to do that. But the more aware you are of the fact that that is the case, you have to allow yourself to stumble and make mistakes and fail along the way. And you're always going to learn from that, and you're always going to grow from that. Over time, it becomes easier to allow yourself to take action regardless of being fearful, because you're always going to be fearful when you're doing or trying anything new. That's another really important thing to know when it comes to fighting imposter syndrome or perfectionism, knowing that your nervous system, your brain is literally wired to have you feel fearful and scared when you're going to do anything differently out of your norm. So knowing that you're going to feel that way, you just have to do it anyways. Do it scared. That's where the saying do it scared comes from. You quite literally have to do it scared or you'll never do anything, because you're going to feel fearful and scared whenever you're trying something new, doing something important to you. It's going to feel scary. And that's okay. It's very normal. Again, awareness is the biggest thing here, just becoming aware of what all of this is and what it means. And this leads me to the next point in fighting imposter syndrome, to look at the facts and challenge your thoughts. Number one, feelings are not facts, and thoughts are not facts. You do not have to believe them. 95% of the thoughts that we think are driven by our subconscious brain, and they are not based in any sort of fact. So being aware of that is extremely helpful in pushing through your fearful thoughts that historically hold you back and keep you stuck, knowing you don't have to listen to them. You can act anyway. Observe them, let them pass by, and act anyway. And the more that you challenge your thoughts, you are sending the signal to your subconscious mind, your nervous system, your body, that it is safe to take action and do new things, although it's always going to feel scary at first and for a while. And when it comes to looking at the facts with imposter syndrome, instead of emotionally listening to what you're feeling, which is that you're not good enough, you aren't equipped, you don't deserve the success, you achieved things by pure luck, whatever it is, look at the facts. You are likely much more capable. You are likely much more deserving of praise and your accomplishments than your brain is telling you. When you really write it down, I suggest journaling it out. Literally everything, every skill that you have, every achievement you have made, big or small, every reason why you are deserving and worthy of it, and how you got there, writing out all the facts and acknowledging the facts. I promise you, you will not be able to argue the fact that you are worthy and deserving of your success, your achievements, your accomplishments when you actually look at the facts. Because it's so easy to just slip into listening to our feelings and our subconscious thoughts that are telling us things like, it was luck, I worked really hard and I can't keep that up for everything, so this won't be something that occurs often. That was a fluke. I got lucky with this, this, and this. Looking at the facts helps you to challenge your thoughts and foster higher self-worth, because you're acknowledging all of the reasons why you are worthy and deserving, instead of just listening to the reasons that you aren't, that your brain comes up with. And that leads me to the next point when it comes to fighting imposter syndrome, which is to accept recognition and compliments and praise instead of brushing it off or making excuses for it, being kind of like self-deprecating, when someone gives you a compliment and you're like, oh, I got lucky with that, or whatever excuse you find to answer a compliment or praise with. Instead, practice accepting compliments, praise with, thank you very much, I really appreciate that, and end it there. This sounds like a very small, simple thing, but if you start to pay attention to it, you might be shocked at how difficult it can be for you to accept a compliment and just be grateful for it instead of talking down about yourself or minimizing it, diminishing it. I know this is something I caught myself doing when I started reframing all of this and doing my healing work. Always making some sort of excuse or comment to diminish my accomplishments or whatever I was being praised for. And that goes into your self-talk and how you talk to yourself, which is ginormously huge in how you experience this life, mentally, in your inner world and your outer world. How you talk to yourself is so important. We have a past episode about the importance of your self-talk, talking more kindly to yourself, being more kind to yourself. Start to be aware of how you talk to yourself and about yourself, and shift it into more encouraging, kind language towards yourself, which goes hand in hand with how you receive praise and compliments. Just accept them and say, thank you very much, I appreciate that. That is being kind to yourself. Next, talk about it. Be open about it, because this will help you see the common humanity amongst us all. Because imposter syndrome is one of those things that, or even perfectionism is one of those things that we feel like we are dealing with on our own, and it's only us, and this is something that we are struggling with alone. And when you're open about it and talking about it, you will see how many other people likely also experience the same feelings and the same struggles. And a lot of the time, this helps you to feel more confident about yourself and to push through imposter syndrome and perfectionism, because you can look at these people who are telling you that they also struggle with this. And a lot of the time, you'll probably think, oh my gosh, how does this person struggle with this? Like, they're so good at this and they're so good at this and they have all these achievements and there's this and this, when they're probably thinking the exact same about you. So it's helpful, it's always helpful to know that you're not alone and be open about what you're struggling with, because you're never the only one who's struggling with whatever you're struggling with. And it can help you and those around you to elevate your relationship with yourself, your healing, and your growth, to be open and talk about these things and push through them together. And it gives you permission to be your authentic self and your vulnerable self, which that alone is really all you could want in life, to be able to be your vulnerable, authentic self. And when you show up in that way, it gives others permission to show up in that way. And life just feels lighter and more enjoyable when you're living that way. It's not that you can ever reach a point where you won't have struggles or you won't struggle with certain feelings or certain thoughts, but when you are able to be open about them with others, that is where the healing and the growth can happen. And finally, therapy and journaling. I have to accredit therapy, talk therapy, to a lot of my healing when it comes to overcoming or being a recovering perfectionist and being able to reframe my mindset around my own relationship with myself, my self-concept. When you work on your self-concept and being kinder to yourself, that helps you to overcome all of these other struggles. And simply becoming aware of the facts and the research behind things like anxiety, depression, imposter syndrome, perfectionism. When I told her I felt like a perfectionist who never perfected anything at all, and she told me that is the definition of shame, and shame is the root of perfectionism, that blew my mind. That changed my life. And then we spent many sessions just on perfectionism and shame. Because I've said it before, but shame is such a deep-rooted, sneaky emotion that drives so much of our action and our thoughts, more than we can even be aware of. And it's very fascinating. So therapy has been a huge help for me to not only hear facts and research, but also to be able to talk through my struggles and my growth. And alongside therapy or outside of therapy, journaling. There's a lot of science and research behind the positive impact of journaling, writing out your thoughts, or doing any sort of structured journaling. Like I said, especially when it comes to perfectionism and imposter syndrome, journaling about the reasons that you are worthy and you are deserving and you are capable, and listing out your accomplishments, whether big or small, writing out affirmations that can help you while you're doing this work to fight imposter syndrome and perfectionism, writing out affirmations that help you to cement that and rewire your brain. So having all of this information doesn't necessarily heal you from ever experiencing the feelings that come with imposter syndrome or perfectionism. You will likely always experience these feelings at some point to some degree in life, but awareness of what it really means and what is actually driving it, and the fact that it's not really real and you don't have to listen to it. You can push through, and it is safe to take action, and you are much more worthy and deserving than your brain sometimes wants to convince you that you are. You don't have to listen to those limiting beliefs. Awareness of all of this is the biggest step to overcoming it and experiencing healing and growth, and not getting stuck in the spiral of analysis paralysis, procrastination, shaming yourself, all the things that come with perfectionism and imposter syndrome that just hold you back and keep you stuck. In my experience, learning about all of this gives you the permission to take action anyways. And also, in my experience, that is when good things happen. When you just take action anyways, no matter how you feel, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to stumble, You're going to feel like you're not good enough sometimes, but even with all of that, it still feels better to take action, to create, learn, do, and try the things you feel called to, instead of feeling stuck and held back because you're listening to the limiting beliefs or fearful thoughts that your brain is feeding you, just simply to keep you stuck in a comfortable position, because to it, being comfortable and never changing or growing feels safer than doing anything new or different. So some key takeaways to finish this episode off with are: imposter syndrome is a myth. It is not real, because people who suffer with it are not imposters. They are doing, trying, learning, and creating, and are often highly achieved. And it's not a medical diagnosis. Imposter syndrome happens when vulnerability is triggered inside of us by certain circumstances, making us experience a loss in self-confidence or lower self-worth, feelings of shame. Feelings and thoughts do not equal facts, so you don't have to listen to them. And imposter syndrome is rooted in perfectionism, which is rooted in shame, which is rooted in childhood, and the conditioning that is stuck inside of you, often formed from the ages of 0 to 7, whatever you were experiencing in your environment then, gets conditioned into you, and that is what your subconscious mind is driven by. Until you can become aware of that and start to challenge those thoughts and feelings. And you can always change the story that you tell about yourself, because you are the only one that is thinking that you are an imposter or feeling like you're an imposter. And you are always able to change the way that you show up and the way that you tell the story about yourself. Let's say even when you're still feeling those feelings inside of yourself, you can choose to show up differently, show up more confidently, and fake it till you make it, some would say. Sometimes you do have to fake it till you make it, and eventually you're not faking anymore. And remember that you're not alone in feeling this. So I hope something in this episode has resonated with you, has helped to empower you to push through imposter syndrome or perfectionism, maybe challenged your thoughts on what imposter syndrome is, because it is not real, and you're not an imposter for trying. As long as you're trying, you're good. You are worthy of being in the rooms you're in, or the positions you're in, or doing or creating whatever it is that you are doing or creating. I know I can still experience these feelings, even when it comes to this podcast, of being like, wait, why would anyone want to listen to what I have to say? Why would I have a podcast that anyone wants to listen to? What am I even saying? Maybe I'm not saying it good enough, blah, 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 blah. But I'm just doing it. I'm just keeping going, and it feels better than for so long when it was just a thought or a dream in my mind that I wanted to try but was held back by perfectionism and imposter syndrome, the shackles of analysis paralysis, and feeling like I wasn't worthy of having this platform and not creating or doing. You either feel shame and resentment towards yourself for not going for the things you want to go for and continuing to do so when you feel called to it, or you feel shame and resentment towards yourself in the absolute worst case scenario that you go for it and you mess up and you fail and you make mistakes. But in my opinion, it still feels better than never trying at all, or stopping due to your fear-based thoughts or feelings that you don't have to listen to because they're not facts. Okay, I feel like I might be rambling now. I am going to go. I am late for dinner. But thank you guys so much for listening. I'd love to hear anything you have to say over on Instagram at Ebbs Flows 222, or send me an email. It's all in the show notes below. I will also link some of the web pages where I got some of this research and whatnot from. Thank you for listening. I'm sending a lot of love and gratitude, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.